Good morning, good morning, good morning. Well, actually, it'll be afternoon. Well, it might be. Depends where you're watching from. Anyway, sod that. Hello. It's Tuesday. Is it Tuesday? It is Tuesday. Tuesday! Terrific Tuesday. Two for Tuesday. I think it might be that me and Domino's are on the same page, as I imagine there'll only be two videos today, as we've got a bit of a hectic one. Don't ask. But anyway, you're looking absolutely amazing, so you're probably having a better week than I am so far. But I'm not going to moan about it. I'm just going to get on with it, because we've been talking about the Idaho 4 case again. Because a lot of people have been asking, right, reaching out and saying, look, is there any way that you can start from the beginning and work all the way through and tell us all the things we need to know? Well, that's what I'm trying to do. These last few videos have been about getting people up to speed with what exactly is happening. Now, some of you may or may not have watched a video that Jules did, only a short one. The link to that will be in the pinned comment, which is showing a clear example of people getting caught with their dick in their hand. And this was News Nation. News Nation clearly using a manipulated piece of information to further push their biased narrative in this case. Now, I did speak, I think it was yesterday, on the fact that Ashley Butfield had to speak about the blood that was in the property, because there's some things you can't ignore. There's certain things that you have to acknowledge, you have to talk about. But look, lo and behold, they do this, which is, again, caught with the dick in their hands. And in this video, I did a video earlier today which was talking about the fact that the Idaho 4 case, it was said to be targeted. This was a target attack. And how does that factor into Bryan Kohberger then, if this was targeted when there was absolutely no connection to Bryan Kohberger whatsoever to this crime? Nothing. Nada. Bugger all. And then we're going to go through some notes. I'm going to go through some notes. I'm not going to put them on the screen because I can't be bothered, because it was driving me insane trying to connect the iPad to the laptop wirelessly. It won't work and it won't play in ball, so I'm just going to read them to you. So, me and my man Eddie, we've been doing some collaborative work in the background and bringing you information that we feel is pertinent to understanding what's going on in this case. And this is going to be an eye-opener again today. We're going to speak specifically about the tip and how that factors into things, and some other things that, again, need to be addressed, and specific questions around this case that deserve to be answered. And so we're going to start with number one. Law enforcement knew Kohberger wasn't in the area before the arrest. And what we mean by that is they had no proof to say otherwise. The law enforcement, at the point where they wrote the PCA, they knew they couldn't prove that he was there. They knew they couldn't prove it. Now, some people are going to turn around and talk about the DNA on the knife sheath. And look, we can do that to death. We can do it to death, and I'm not bringing that up at the moment. But what we can say is all of the things in the PCA, they weren't indicative of a person who was in the area at the time of the crime. The car, couldn't prove it. Phone, no pings, no nothing. And they had to push other things, such as a stalker narrative, to sow a seed that would lead to where we are today. So, number two, are the three males witnesses or in the guilty group? We've got these three unidentified individuals seemingly being protected by a protection order. So what is that all about? What is their connection to this crime? They had DNA found at the scene of the crime, and somebody knows who they are. Somebody knows who they are. And you would think that it would be explained who they are and no relevance to it. But that's not what's happening here. It's being concealed, hidden, pushed under the rug. And people are trying to tease it out, trying to pull it out, but they're being very, very resistant of it. And why is that? 2 years and 3 months, will those responsible ever be known? Because at the moment, law enforcement have just got you looking at Bryan Kohberger. So many people have asked, okay, what happens in the event that Bryan Kohberger gets found not guilty? They just can't prove it. They just can't prove it. Do they start again? Do they come after Bryan Kohberger in a different way? Do they then decide, actually, we're going to... And what happens in the background? Do the families all of a sudden garner an interest that some of them haven't had since the beginning of it all? What happens? And will we ever truly know any different version of the Idaho 4? Is that the point? Is that the point, that we go down a route of a situation where Bryan Kohberger can't be proven, So it looks like he gets off on a technicality. He goes in history of someone who technically gets away with murder, but the point being is that something that happens and some people and their involvement, they don't get looked at. Because Bryan Kohberger will always be the guilty party in many people's eyes. And that's a scary thought. Would Bryan Kohberger ever be safe again? This is why we talked about right at the beginning with Bryan Kohberger needing to be exonerated of the crime, because he does need to be exonerated, because there's a massive, massive disparity between being exonerated so people understand completely that he's just not involved and simply not being able to be found guilty, but a load of people think that he is. So we've got the next one, which it says the FBI has the power to influence, to, let's say, encourage state and local authorities to meet their objectives for undisclosed and secretive reasons. And we see this with the case being completely sealed up. And I know what some people are going to turn around and say. They're going to say that Ann Taylor was the very first antagonist of the gag order. She was the one who wanted it in place. But I don't think as time has progressed that has been the case. And I think that we've seen the gag order exponentially grow into what it is. Where literally everything is being gagged. Every single thing. It's almost like something's going to come out and they're not going to let you see it. This is the most secretive case that I think that we've perhaps ever seen. And it is literally everything. Absolutely everything has been sealed. It would seem that there was a decision made at the early stages that there would be a gag order, but then as time progressed, things would be ungagged. And that seems to have been alluded to by Ann Taylor in a Hair and a few months ago, where it looked like we'd got to that kind of fork in the road where she had said, look, you'd said you was going to start to open stuff, and we're at that juncture now. There are certain things that no longer need to be sealed, and the public actually does need to start seeing some of this stuff, and we've got nowhere with it. Number 6, the original PCA and the now altered version admitting Kohberger wasn't even near the residence mirrors police forensic investigators knowing Kohberger, Elantra and phones were associated collectively and knew where and when he was, which also mirrors why police had reason to believe the attack took place between 4 and 4:25. So they've got this pinned down as being around a certain time. And I imagine that they've got it pinned to this time frame because this is a time frame where they feel that Bryan Kohberger can't be found. Like, some people will say, well, why Bryan Kohberger? Why Bryan Kohberger? And I always turn around and say, well, Bryan Kohberger posed the perfect person. And someone said, well, then why did you not pick a scumbag? Or say that it was Brent Kohberger who did it, and when they killed him, let the crime die with him. But it wouldn't have died with him. Because Brent Kohberger was an ex-military guy who was executed by law enforcement. And that would have opened a huge can of worms. For a start off, it would have opened a can of worms as to why did Brent Kohberger, an ex-military person, execute 4 university students? And did that have any connection to his service in the forces? Was this an untreated situation where a soldier had not been looked after in the aftermath of his service to his country, and it ended up in this situation? Would that have resulted in people being sued? Again, we've got money invested into this situation. But Bryan Kohberger, if you can find a period of time where this loner, this person from out of state, he's got no connection to anything, anyone, he can't prove where he is, who he is, how he is, he's not with anybody, there's this period of time where he is just off radar, and that just fits perfectly in with this time frame. And I wonder whether the crime didn't take that place at that time at all. And remember, Ann Taylor very early on had said, my client wasn't in the area of this crime, or wasn't in this area at the time of the crime. And I think that's the bone of contention here. When did the crime actually take place? When did it take place? When you've got comments being made that would allude to dark hours and the time frames not really adding up with when people got home. And was Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk actually at the property? Was Bethany Funk at the party? Because she seemingly saw Xana and Ethan leave the party, but how did she leave? How did she see that unless she was there? And how did she know when they got home if she was at the party? There's loads of things that leave you a bit like scratching your head. But was this crime, did this truly take place at this time? Is that when the crime actually occurred? Or is that just where they moved it to because it fitted in with who they wanted to blame on this crime? The PCA is very clear. The FBI, state and officials are absolutely in agreement Kohberger wasn't there, but is being charged with the fatal assaults. Again, with respect of all the written documentation, there is nothing that would suggest Bryan Kohberger was at the scene of this crime at the time they're telling you this was being done. It just isn't happening. If you think I'm wrong, prove me wrong. Send me something that proves otherwise. Because the phone, there was no phone pings in the area. There was nothing. There's nothing whatsoever. They don't even commit to his phone being switched off. They can't do that. They don't do it. And if you think they do, then you're just not paying close enough attention. There is no doubt the FBI gave local police the tip, not knowing if the defendant was involved or not at all. That's where that came from. FBI gave law enforcement Bryan Kohberger. I sense the reason for the 8 to 10 hour alleged delay in calling 911 is directly related to the 3 concealed males who are very likely the suspects. 8 hours is too long, and if you factor in we could potentially have seen the crime murders moved, so it would actually happen earlier, then that starts to expand into an 8 to 10 hour period. So if you've got 8 to 10 hour period where you're seemingly suggesting that people saw what happened, heard what happened, or heard something, saw somebody in the house that shouldn't have been there, heard noises, heard crying, heard dogs barking, whatever. We're talking about a massacre in that house. A massacre. You saw that house come down. You've heard of House of Cards. That was a house of cardboard. They'd have heard something. They want you to believe that this happened in people's sleep, but we know that's not true. And why do they want to do that? Because they want you to imagine somebody being able to creep into this house, like the fucking Grinch, and just executing people while they sleep silently, walking out and going to the next one. But we know that's not the case, thanks to Steve Gonsalves opening his fucking mouth. They would put up one hell of a fight. One hell of a fight isn't people being executed in their sleep. That is one hell of a fight. One hell of a fight provides noise. Noise carries through the house. People hear. Simple as that. So then you're telling me that off the back end of that, you've got an 8 to possibly 10 hour time period where nothing happens. Nothing happens. Anyone who thinks that, fuck right off. I hope that was clear. I also sense the actual group who committed the attack will never be known, which was predetermined due to special interests involving those in power, specifically the FBI. And this is potentially where we now factor in what the likes of Yomp are saying, for instance. So if there is something going on, could potentially be narcotics. Again, that's not the top of my tree, it's not the top of my list, but why would the FBI want to conceal the who really did this or what actually went on? Is it because the FBI just fucked up? They were tracking Bryan Kohberger. They thought Bryan Kohberger was involved because they thought he was involved in another crime. Dana Smithers, for instance. That led them to this, and then it just turned into an utter clusterfuck. And now they just want to kind of walk away, which we spoke about this months ago. There was almost this point where the FBI was all over it like fucking flies on shit, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, actually, we're going to back away, and the rest is history. Then we come over to this one. The FBI should have supervised the tip. It should have been in supervision of that tip that they gave to local law enforcement to include, when in fact we now know there was none. The state and local authorities are left hanging in a futile attempt to somehow hope a jury can further be deceived into finding a defendant guilty of murder. And that's where we're at. That seems to be where we're at. The FBI held their hand and walked them to a certain point because they thought someone was guilty, and then it got to the point where they just couldn't prove it. They couldn't prove it, and then it's like, right, we're going to wipe our hands, we're going to wash our hands of it. You're just going to have to use the information that you've got and fucking hope that we get away with it. And the only way they can do that is by leveraging certain things, and that is bias, community bias. That's what they're relying on now. Like, I know so many people, even the guilters, are turning around saying, oh, you're going to see so much more when this goes to trial, so much more. That's because you know there's not enough here. You're just convinced there must be more. But what if you're wrong? And I asked this yesterday. What if you're wrong? Because I think you are. I think the FBI fucked this up, got to a point where they had to hold their hands up and walk away, and they had to leave Moscow Police Department and the prosecution holding the dicks in their hand. A lot of dicks being held in a lot of hands, and a lot of people who have been involved in this who have subsequently walked the fuck away from it, gone, wiped their hands and left. Tell me I'm wrong. The tip wasn't the result of any IgG work, proven by the need to get the father's DNA. We've always questioned, well, if they did all this work, why did they still have to go and get the dad's DNA? Well, I'll tell you why, because they didn't fucking find anything through the IgG. So they physically had to go and get the father's DNA. That's how they did. And then they already knew who Bryan Kohberger was. They went and got his father's DNA. They then got a buccal swab, and then they've got your match. They fabricated that. That's the way I look at it. The knife sheath, in my opinion, never had anything on it that could be tracked. It could be found. They had a partial and ambiguous sample, and they tried to twist the narrative by saying there was a 99.99999% fucking match, which is the same with every single person on the planet. So it wasn't a lie. It was just a lie that they told, or a twist on the truth to again manipulate, to condition. They didn't lie by saying that this partial ambiguous DNA was a 99%, or 99.999% match, because everybody on the planet had the same fucking match. But you was conditioned again. The lack of accountability doesn't fall solely on the FBI's shoulders, because former police chief James Fry appointed Brett Payne to lead the investigation. Let me start that again. The lack of accountability doesn't fall solely on the FBI's shoulders, because the former police chief James Fry appointed Brett Payne to lead the investigation does not relieve Fry of overseeing the investigation, because the homicides were in his jurisdiction. So any decisions he made were his responsibility, and to bring any involved to justice and any punishment for their actions. Because the defendant was not present to commit the murders, we understand justice wasn't the priority, which was revealed knowingly when stating, "This matter is in the investigative stage, and while criminal charges have been brought, those charges are not yet publicly known. Premature public disclosure of the details of this law enforcement investigation will create a serious and imminent threat to effective law enforcement and could result in the premature end of this investigation, which could create a threat to public safety." Now, our response to that is simple. The premature end of their investigation was ended by the PCA, which was when law enforcement was threatened by their false premises in bringing charges against an innocent man not guilty of murder. Charges due to not being present, which could have created a threat to public safety. They created the threat upon themselves when their own PCA didn't find the defendant in the area between 3 and 5 a.m. One man arrested, booked, charged, held without bail. Where was the threat to public safety? Thompson's favourite line: it doesn't exist. There's a lot to digest, there's a lot to take in. Maybe you have to watch this video a couple of times. I will be doing a live. I will go live again, and we'll go over everything and all of the notes that we have. But at the end of the day, I am in the group that don't believe Bryan Kohberger did this crime. That's just where I am. That might mean that you don't like who I am. It might mean that you don't like my content. It might mean that we disagree. Look, if you're someone who believes Bryan Kohberger did this crime, I appreciate that. I respect that. I just hope that your stance on him being guilty isn't because you have been manipulated, you have been coerced, you have been controlled and programmed by false information to feel a certain way. Everybody is innocent until they have been proven guilty. And what we're seeing in this Kohberger situation is there are many, many people. He is not in the trial, he hasn't been through the trial, and rarely in the public domain there is nowhere near enough evidence to convince people, or shouldn't be able to be convinced that he did this crime. So if you think that he did, I have to ask why. I have to wonder why. And again, and I asked this multiple times, many times, and you who have been around the channel for a while will know exactly what I'm going to say. I always invite people to comment down below and say, why do you think that he is guilty? And there has been not one person yet who has actually been able to write a valid piece of information on why they believe he is, because they always have to include things that are not factual and things that have been pushed out by the likes of Ashley Butfield or Nancy Toxic Disgrace, Howard Blumber even. I'm even getting that, and those sort of people. They got caught. Again, I'm going to say it one more time. They got caught with a dick in their hands. Check out the link in the pinned comment that will take you over to Jules as a plain example of how media manipulates a story. Anyway, I'm off. Got shit to do. Love you all. There might be a third video. Who knows? Love you. Mwah.